This storm just took a dangerous turn and things are changing fast. What started as a normal round of summer storms has now shifted into something much more serious, with a growing tornado threat, dangerous flash flooding, and a tropical system that forecasters did not expect to strengthen this quickly. Today we are going to break down everything that is happening, why the system suddenly became more dangerous, and what you need to watch for over the next few days. So let's get right into it. We have a lot to cover today, so let's start with the big picture. Over the last 24 hours, the storm system sitting over the central part of the country has grown stronger than almost every model predicted. The Storm Prediction Center has now placed a large section of the plains and the Midwest under an enhanced risk of severe weather, which is one step up from where we were just yesterday. That means today is going to be more dangerous than what these areas have already gone through this week. And honestly, some of these towns have already seen 5 or 6 days in a row of rough weather. The main states under this enhanced risk today are Kansas, Nebraska, and parts of Missouri. To the east of that, there's a slight risk stretching from Colorado all the way back into Ohio. And the biggest concern there is going to be damaging straight-line winds. We could easily see 2 or 3 separate lines of thunderstorms roll through these areas before the day is done. Large hail is expected to be the biggest problem closer to the Colorado border, while the tornado threat is going to be centered mainly around Wichita, Topeka, and Salina this afternoon and evening. If you live in any of these cities, now is the time to make sure your phone alerts are turned on and that you have more than one way to get warnings, because storms like this can move fast and catch people off guard. Now here is where the dangerous turn really comes into play. Tomorrow was originally expected to be a quieter day, but new data coming in overnight has completely changed that outlook. Instead of the system weakening, it is now expected to strengthen again as it pulls in extra moisture and instability from the Gulf. This means tomorrow could actually end up being worse than today in some areas. We are now looking at 2 separate slight risk zones. One sits over eastern Colorado and western Kansas, and the other stretches from southern Michigan through Indiana and down into the Carolinas. Connecting all of that together is a massive marginal risk zone that basically covers almost the entire eastern half of the country. The main threat for tomorrow is going to be damaging wind gusts, and we are talking about gusts that could reach anywhere between 60 and 75 miles per hour in the strongest storms. That is enough to snap tree branches, knock out power lines, and cause real damage to roofs and fences. On top of that, there is still a decent chance of large hail up in the high plains, and forecasters are now watching closely for a couple of tornadoes forming somewhere near Fort Wayne, South Bend, and Columbus. So if you are anywhere in that stretch, please do not ignore the warnings tomorrow. Let's talk timing now, because this is where things get a little more detailed. Right now, as this video is being put together, storms are already lined up from the Central Plains back through parts of the Ohio Valley. Some of these early morning storms are producing isolated damaging winds, especially around the St. Louis and Indianapolis corridor. Most of this morning activity should weaken a little around midday, giving everyone a short break. But do not let that break fool you, because a brand new round of storms is expected to fire up again later this afternoon, somewhere between 4 and 6 o'clock. This is the part of the day forecasters are most concerned about. There's a real chance we could see 1 or 2 rotating supercells develop just north of Wichita, and if that happens, it raises the risk of an isolated but strong tornado. Even if these storms do not stay separate and instead merge into one big line, the damaging wind threat will still be very serious, especially for communities near Salina, Hutchinson, and Newton. By 9 or 10 o'clock tonight, this line of storms is expected to push toward Topeka and eventually Kansas City, still carrying the risk of scattered damaging winds and maybe even an isolated tornado before it finally starts to fall apart overnight as it moves toward the Ozarks. Meanwhile, back along the front range of the Rockies, a separate batch of storms is expected to fire up during the late afternoon as well. These will move through areas like Denver, Fort Collins, and Greeley, bringing damaging winds close to 75 miles per hour, along with the chance of hail large enough to dent cars. Now, about tomorrow's severe weather in the Ohio Valley, I want to be honest with you. There is still a lot of uncertainty in exactly how this plays out. Some of the higher resolution weather models are showing a fairly strong area of rotation developing over northern Indiana and Ohio during the afternoon, with a few supercells that could become dangerous rather quickly. Other models are showing something much weaker, more like leftover disorganized storms rather than anything rotating. This is exactly the kind of setup that keeps meteorologists up late at night, because these systems can be extremely tricky to nail down until they are only a few hours away. What we do know is that some of the more aggressive models are showing elevated tornado parameters over Fort Wayne and Toledo, which tells us that if storms do organize the way some models suggest, at least a couple of tornadoes are possible, and there is even a small chance one could track close to Cincinnati. We will keep watching this closely and update everyone as soon as we get clearer data. As we move into the following day, the severe weather threat does not completely go away. It just shifts a little further east. There is growing concern building along the Interstate 95 corridor. especially from central Pennsylvania down through Virginia. A new line of storms is expected to develop, with the potential for a few rotating cells capable of producing an isolated tornado or two, along with large hail and damaging winds. If you have outdoor plans anywhere from the DC area down toward Virginia Beach, you will want to keep a close eye on the sky during the middle of the afternoon into the early evening hours, because this is when the threat will be at its highest. Further west, into the Ohio Valley, the severe threat looks like it will be lower, mostly limited to isolated wind and hail with maybe a very brief spin-up tornado possible, but overall the atmosphere should be a little less charged in that region by that point. Now let's shift gears and talk about what might honestly be the more dangerous part of this entire pattern, and that is flooding. The ground across a large stretch of the middle of the country is already completely saturated from repeated rounds of heavy rain over the past week, and that is a big problem because saturated ground cannot absorb new rainfall nearly as fast. This new storm system is expected to dump another significant round of rain right on top of areas that simply do not have anywhere for that water to go. Forecasters have already issued a moderate risk of excessive rainfall for a large section of eastern Kansas and western Missouri. And I want to point out that this is the second highest level on the entire excessive rainfall scale, so this is not something to take lightly. We are talking about the real possibility of several inches of rain falling in a fairly short window, and some isolated pockets could end up seeing somewhere between 6 and 10 inches of total rainfall by the time this system finally clears out. If you live in this region and you have to drive anywhere over the next couple of days, please be extremely cautious, because flash flooding can turn a normal road into a life-threatening situation in just minutes. Remember, if you come across a flooded roadway, turn around. Do not try to drive through it. Outside of that moderate risk zone, there is also a slight risk of excessive rainfall stretching from Omaha back toward the Ohio Valley, along with a couple of smaller pockets near Denver, and even out toward parts of the desert southwest. Beyond that, almost the entire eastern half of the country is sitting under some level of marginal flood concern, but the real bullseye for the heaviest rain is going to be right around that Kansas and Missouri border. Different weather models are honestly all over the place on exactly where the absolute heaviest rain will fall, which is pretty normal with a system this complex. Some models are showing the heaviest totals landing just north of Wichita, with isolated spots picking up close to 10 inches. Other models are shifting that bullseye further south and west, closer to Salina, with slightly lower totals, but still enough to cause serious flash flooding. Either way, this is a dangerous setup, and it is one of the main reasons this storm has taken such a dangerous turn compared to where things looked just a day or two ago. Now let's move on to something completely different, but just as important, because this is not just a story about severe storms and flooding here in the United States. There's also a tropical system out in the Pacific that has rapidly intensified and is now on a track that could bring it uncomfortably close to a populated group of islands within the next couple of days. This system currently has sustained winds of around 65 miles per hour, and it is forecast to strengthen just a little more before it gets close to landfall. If that happens, it would be an extremely rare event for this particular stretch of coastline, since a storm of this strength almost never makes a direct approach in this exact spot. Right now, the forecast has this system approaching sometime late tomorrow into the following morning, with the closest pass, or possible landfall, happening somewhere around the middle of the day. Looking at recent satellite imagery, this storm looks impressively organized, with a clear and tightening center, which is usually a sign that a system is either at or very close to hurricane strength. Over the next couple of days, the outer rain bands are expected to arrive first, bringing gusty winds and heavy downpours, followed by the core of the storm moving through during the peak of the daytime hours. After that, it should pull away fairly quickly during the evening, but not before clipping several nearby areas with tropical storm conditions. This is going to bring real impacts. We are talking about dangerous storm surge along the coast, along with sustained winds that could gust as high as 70 miles per hour in the strongest bands, especially closer to the main highway that runs along the southern shoreline. I do want to mention that there are a couple of model solutions that keep the very center of the storm just offshore, maybe Kins to 25 miles away. But even in that scenario, the eastern-facing coastline would still deal with significant surge and damaging wind gusts. This is simply not something people in this region are used to seeing. And a big part of the reason this storm has intensified so quickly comes down to unusually warm ocean water sitting right in its path. Switching over to the Atlantic side of things, the tropical picture there has actually calmed down a little compared to yesterday. We had a system that looked like it was rapidly organizing off the coast of Africa, but strong upper-level wind shear has torn it apart over the last day, dropping its chance of development down to only around 30%. However, there's a second tropical wave following right behind it. This one looks like it has a better chance of eventually becoming our next named storm. Right now, the atmosphere around that wave looks a little more favorable, with less shear in its path, so we will be watching this one much more closely over the coming days. As for where these systems might be headed, the first weaker wave looks like it will track more toward the southern Caribbean and possibly South America, while the stronger wave behind it looks like it will approach the Lesser Antilles sometime next week. Beyond that point, though, the long-range guidance is honestly pretty spread out, so it is too early to say with any real confidence where it goes from there. We will keep tracking this and bring you updates as soon as the picture becomes clearer. Now, looking further ahead here in the United States, once we get past this weekend, the overall pattern is expected to stay fairly active, although exactly where the next round of severe storm sets up is still a little uncertain. It does look like the northern plains and the upper Midwest will see another chance of strong to severe storms early next week as yet another disturbance moves through. And this could bring another line of thunderstorms into the Great Lakes region by the middle of the week. After that point, confidence really starts to drop off, since we are getting far enough out that small changes in the pattern can make a big difference in the final outcome. One thing worth keeping in mind, though, is that we are now getting closer to the point in the calendar where the extreme summer heat typically starts easing back a little. So if you are someone who has been waiting for a break from the heat and humidity, that relief is not too far off on the horizon. Before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone how quickly these situations can change. This entire system looked far less threatening just a day or two ago, and now we are dealing with an enhanced tornado risk, a moderate flash flood threat, and a rapidly intensifying tropical system all within the same 48-hour window. That is exactly why it is so important to stay updated, rather than relying only on the forecast from a few days ago. We will be tracking every part of this system closely, and if anything changes overnight, we will have another update ready for you first thing tomorrow morning. That is going to wrap up today's breakdown of this fast-changing and increasingly dangerous storm system. Make sure you are prepared, have multiple ways to receive warnings, and please do not take any unnecessary risks if you are in one of the areas we talked about today, especially with the flooding and tornado threats, both being on the table at the same time. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe out there, and we will see you in the next update.